All right, well, let's get started. I think this was, funnily enough, this topic started. I think, Mark, it was a conversation between you and Joanne Klein on Twitter about, like, she was looking for a solution for her business, and and you said, why don't you just do it with, here's what we do. So we thought we would maybe talk about building solutions for your business using SharePoint lists when you may not need a robust line of business application or a separate set of user fees. So when is good enough using SharePoint lists? So I think all of you on the call know the team, know our perspectives on things. We'll be quick, right? A little bit about the power of lists. Emily, I know you put some process content in here which supports this, which is excellent. And then we'll talk about what we're doing for CRM, such as it is, for Sympraxis. So we'll talk about some other examples if we have time and leave you with some resources. So here's the premise we started with. Start small, think big, move fast. Iterate quickly, fail fast, all those things. But we can get started and provide value very, very quickly with some basic things that we do in SharePoint lists. Who wants to talk about some of the core capabilities of lists and why they're so powerful?
Let me do mine more basic. The reason that I like this is because I'm not very smart and I like being able to use things I already know how to use. So that was one of the things whenever I'm trying to build a solution to something, building it out of something that I already know. That's what always draws me to these kind of solutions. Go ahead, Emily.
And that's a good segue. A lot of people will use Excel because they know how to use Excel, and then they create it into what they call a database, which I'm sure would make a lot of people cringe, right? Because it's not necessarily the best use case there. So a lot of times SharePoint lists are actually better because you can have special permissions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a shared Excel sheet where someone wrote over someone else's cell, and then it caused all of these different issues. But in a SharePoint list, for example, you can have permissions that say someone can only edit their own items that they created. So you're having a little bit more control over the environment there as well.
It's not quite a database, right? And I know the folks on this call have strong opinions about that, but I think citizen developer isn't a concept that was originated with Power Apps, Power Automate. There's been citizen developers for as long as there have been apps like FileMaker and SharePoint lists, right? This is not
Lotus 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? How many people do you know who ran their business with Excel or Lotus?
Well, I mean, I worked for financial service, very, very, very large financial services firms that that manage their entire business using Excel,
right?
Like that would make you scared,
right?
And still do,
and still do, yeah.
Yep.
So it is when good enough is good enough, but there are some ways to graduate that.
I think of lists as they're not a database, but they're like a database table.
Yeah,
and they do all of the basic stuff that a database table does. So as long as your data is sort of rectangular, it's flat and rectangular, then lists work great. So with list formatting, it doesn't have to be rectangular anymore so much.
It's true.
So this is a list of some of the goodness that you get with lists, correct? Does anybody want to add anything to what's in these bullets or highlight any of them?
Go ahead. I was just going to say another value of this, and I can't remember if we have another slide on this, is while it's easy for folks like me to get things figured out without having to buy something and test something because I can cobble things together with parts that I already understand, it's also that way for the users. So it leverages their familiarity with the platform already and how lists work and all that. So I can't remember if we have a special slide on that or not.
Mark Crispin mentioned about the 5,000 item limit. I'm going to just say with modern and the paging that it does by scrolling, the scrolling paging, I don't know that I have a huge problem with the 5,000 item list. I mean, yes, if you want to bring all the list items back into your data set and you're doing that through code, you'd have to do paging to do that. But I mean, unless you're doing summary activities, I don't think that there's any real issue with the 5,000 items and storing them, as long as you have good filtering, good viewing, good indexing.
As much as I hate that limit,
I know you do.
Feel a little bit strongly about this. I think in a day-to-day basis, it actually comes up a lot less often than people, even like me, complain about it. It's more of a programming thing than it is a user thing. Sorry, Todd.
I was just going to say that when we first became familiar with the 5,000 limit in a view issue, it came up all the time, and just it was like one of those fun house mazes where you run into it and then you turn around, you try to get around it, and you run into it again. It just happened all the time. And now, to Mark's point, it's at the point where when I get bumped up against that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We got to do a thing with and it's always programmatic things, rolling things up. But yeah, they've done a great job of working around that. It hardly ever comes up anymore.
I think that's all we had on this.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the framework for as we think about the solution and getting the solution the right sized. Emily, I think you framed up some ideas for us about where do we start and how do we frame this out?
Absolutely. So I think I've talked about this before in previous Ask Sympraxis episodes, really in respect to building communication sites or team sites, but it's really something that you should be doing before you start building anything, is generating these user needs statements, which are these actionable problem statements talking about who the user is, what they need to do, and why that's important. So for example, we have a Sympraxis employee who needs to track inbound requests so that we can help our clients with their projects. And that's kind of where we started with what we wanted to build for our Sympraxis CRM-ish solution. Very often, as you're building these user need statements, it's actually going to become what is your feature list. And it can also serve as the questions for task-based testing later on. And it's also a way to showcase success of the project to stakeholders, where we're saying, this is what we set out to do. We tested it. We can confirm that we achieved those results, and thereby we are successful on this project.
Sure. For DevOps folks, it's your definition of done, right?
When you're doing these different user need statements, it's really important to think about varying audiences. So Sympraxis is a little bit challenging of an example because there's just 6 of us and we're a pretty flat organization. But I added in, let's say we have a Sympraxis partner. They need to evaluate the resource availability to make sure all employees have the right workload. So maybe when you are building out your different users, you might have something like a site owner, right? Or a site admin, someone who's going to be interacting with this solution and maybe providing updates to it, for example.
Now, lots of times that's we're a very flat organization. We're not really, there's no boss, right? But lots of times there's a role like Sympraxis partner might be boss, right? Evaluate resource reliability or availability. So there's a bunch of work going on, but there's some monitoring that goes on top of that boss kind of layer.
And then the next layer up from this, Emily.
Yeah, so after you have figured out these user needs and goals, it can be really helpful to align them all to your company goals. Not only does this show how Microsoft 365 supports your company goals in the organization and how important it is as a platform, but it can also help you prioritize projects across departments. Because I know often if you're that internal customer service facing person who's helping build in Microsoft 365, you might have the quality organization and the procurement organization both say that they have a critical project, but one of them aligns to a company goal and the other one doesn't. That might help you pick which one goes first in the build.
And a way to measure how we're doing?
So a lot of things, I mean, we have this whole separate effort going on with the maturity model for Microsoft 365, but I think it actually does apply here. You know, we decided, we intentionally decided this does not need to be something where we've got the perfect, be all end all kind of solution to manage our inbound requests, right? We didn't want to shoot for level 500. We sort of felt like, level 200, managing things pretty well so that we don't drop inbound requests on the floor was a step up from Julie and I were probably, before the rest of you joined, we're probably at, or let me put it this way, before anyone else joined Sympraxis, before Julie joined, I was at a level 100. I'd get inbound requests through email and phone calls, and usually I followed up on them, and now I think we're at a more managed level. We're even more of it at a defined level in some cases. We get requests, we have a process, we discuss them on Fridays, we've wrapped a process around it to get us to the point where we feel good enough about what we're doing. It doesn't need it, it's not our core competency to do CRM, but it is important that we help clients sort of work with clients to sort of gel what their project is and how important it is for them. If you're interested in this stuff, there's some links in the resources slide about the maturity model.
Yeah, this was a part of it when we were talking about this. I think as consultants, we have all stepped into a customer somewhere and seen some solution to a problem and went, oh my God, I can't believe they put this in SharePoint. My God, why did they bend SharePoint over backwards to do this thing that SharePoint was never designed to do? We've all done that. And a lot of times that's legitimate. But sometimes good enough is good enough. Like sometimes it makes sense. And I like this slide because it kind of rationalizes that behavior. If you're at level 100, it probably doesn't make sense to buy Salesforce for CRM. It just doesn't make sense. That's the right way to do it. That's the best tool. It's purpose-built and all that. But when you're at level 100, it doesn't make any sense. And you may never get up to the level where it makes sense. And so if you're ever, to the people in the audience here, if you're ever in a situation where you could put something in SharePoint, you're like, well, I don't know, there's a product that does that. Maybe this isn't the best fit. Kind of ask yourself where you're at on this maturity model, because for where you're at, it might be the best solution. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can change later.
Todd, I think the other part is knowing when to ditch the old solution.
Yep.
And where on this level of maturity does the solution that you cobbled together not need, can you ditch it for Salesforce? And not because that's where you get into those situations where you've now bent SharePoint 360 degrees around just to make it look like or work like Salesforce. And that's not, like, you should have just ditched it and gone to Salesforce at level 300. And, just sort of that failing fast, being nimble about it, knowing what use cases and user statements you're trying to meet, because those change over time. And I think you mentioned something in our planning phase where, like, what got you here today isn't going to get you there tomorrow. And that's a really important thing, because, what we have going on, what Mark had going on before Julie got there, worked for Mark ish. But then when there were more of us, it stopped working. And so we reevaluated the process and we went to a different level. And I think,
interestingly, Julie and I, once she joined and we sort of got things ironed out, we tried to jump to level 400 or something. We actually went out and started using a service that was really complicated, didn't really integrate with our financial software. It turned out that it was way too much, right? So we went the opposite direction. We decided that we were going to be really good at this, and we don't really want to be that good at it.
Nor need to be. I think that's the bigger,
to be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The bigger key was there was so much in it and we didn't need anything. I'm like, why do we need to define these stages? Who the frig cares if it's a 50% or 100 when there's only two of us? It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. So we were essentially finding our high water mark over several years to figure out where in this scale we ought to be in managing this particular process.
Yeah, and Derek referenced a book. It's a book I read a few years ago called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," and it's kind of about this thing, though not from a technical standpoint, but from a career standpoint. Doing specific things, working long hours or having a specific perspective of things might get you to a specific level, but it will keep you from going to a higher level. So you have to be aware of shifting that. And I think from an economic standpoint, there's this idea called the sunk cost fallacy, where you stick with something just because you've got a lot of time or effort sunk into it. But the name of that is the sunk cost fallacy. And that's kind of what Derek's saying. Don't get tied into the SharePoint bit and think you have to stay there just because you've done a lot of work. Once you realize you need to move to the next level, that SharePoint solution, it did well by you. It got you where you were at. Every solution will have its last day, and this is SharePoint's last day for this. And that's cool. That's good.
And those SharePoint solutions can so often help define your needs or the different business process flows you're going to have in those more mature systems as well. So sometimes all of that pre-work really can feed into your next step really well.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So I do a lot of stuff with PowerShell, and I always tell people that are trying to do something new with PowerShell that when you're trying to get into PowerShell, you're really fighting a two-front war. You're fighting the process war, so the part that Emily just talked about, figuring out what you're trying to do, but you're also fighting the language war, the platform war, and you're fighting them at the same time, and you're getting bitten by both of them. So a good benefit from doing the SharePoint route is you're getting rid of one of those fights. You're getting rid of the platform fight. So like Emily said, you can focus on the process, and then when you move up, you've spent all of your time working on the process, so it's really well defined. So that's a good advantage to it.
Do you also find that now that Power Apps is so readily available that converting a SharePoint list solution to a Power App now enables you to go to that next level without necessarily a huge investment?
One of the nice things about that spectrum of options is that it's gotten broader, right? So we have just a plain old list where you get the forms that come out of the box, and they're generally good enough for a lot of things. We now have JSON formatting on those forms, so we can actually sort of make them a little bit prettier, add some descriptive text, things like that. Then we can decide if that doesn't get us there, we can go to a Power App. If we need something a little bit fancy, or we need more screens or a process built into it. And after that, you can even go to sort of the Dataverse, the model-driven apps, which become sort of enterprise-wide. So you've got this broad spectrum of options. And if you're not quite sure what the process is, or you're not quite sure how important this is in the organization and stuff, you can start, as we're talking about here, you can start really, really simple, and then sort of graduate up along the way if you feel like you need to. If we became a 100-person company, we probably would go up that spectrum somehow.
And just to expand on that, after the Dataverse thing, although I don't know I'd go in that direction, I think there's a Y there. If there's
sure.
By Y, I don't mean the letter Y, I mean like a branch. Like you're at a point where you're at Power Apps and that's not enough. Now you can branch off and do the Dataverse Power Apps thing if that is your whatever that you like, or you can branch off and do the SharePoint framework route to create a custom user interface on top of list or lists. And hopefully, from what I hear, they're hoping in the next 6 or so months that they'll be looking at beta features for allowing SharePoint framework solutions to be in those add, edit, and view panels instead of only Power Apps. So that's also going to be another maturity sort of aspect of things.
I would also say, Julie, at that point, if you're thinking about either going into Dataverse or you're going into SharePoint framework solutions, you should also start, that's part of your tree to start saying, okay, this is a custom app. Do we need 100. To invest in, yep. Do we need to invest in another app, like a SaaS solution to solve this, so that you may or may not want to take on managing that technical debt?
Right, and you can always make decisions like, hey, there's an app that does a bunch of this stuff that we need, but we want an easy way for the users to interact with it. And then so you're not maybe totally abandoning this list, but you're using that list as a trigger to further other processes, and you're integrating those systems together. So absolutely a lot of different ways that can go depending on how your maturity increases.
So with this lens, right, to look at what matters most, what's most important to us, here's where we went with it. Just advance us here. We picked what mattered most to us. Here's where we were falling down or just knew we needed to kind of up level our capability around managing it. At first, marketing components, marketing activities, and as client opportunities, right, with new clients, with new projects. So we picked some processes that are relatively, for a professional services firm, sacred processes, like setting up new projects and clients and understanding prospective utilization for all of us to make sure we have exactly the right amount of work or as close to that as we can. So these were the things that we picked. We figured this was low-hanging fruit for us, and we could put something together that would do that. But there were other tools that did things that we knew SharePoint wasn't going to do, and that were really well suited and easily snapped in to what we were doing, like MailChimp and Rebrandly. Anybody want to speak more about this? This was built when I got here, so I'm going to count on Julie and Mark and Jacob, the OGs.
Well, it actually was built mostly by Emily, who just banged it out like that.
Yeah,
of course. In a morning,
we showed up one day and it was just beautiful. Like, whoa.
Little advertisement for Emily. You really want her building stuff like this for you,
exactly.
Because not only does it work really well, it's pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about what we, meaning Emily, built.
Chief Judger.
Chief Judger, yes.
Well, I guess I'll start.
and Emily really is awesome. But what we had some conversations about this, right? We talked about, well, what are the things that we need to do? And the thing that was really cool is that Emily just sort of like went dark for, I don't know, 20 minutes or something.
Yeah, I was just
came back with the answer. But it's expanded over time, right? I mean, you started with the germ of things, and it's gotten a little broader and a little taller, right?
Absolutely. And I think, Mark alluded to it. The best thing that I like about SharePoint Lists is it was a 15, 20 minute effort just to get us to a better place. I believe we were using a OneNote notebook and we were moving things around, and it was very clearly, okay, well, we need statuses and we need to group by statuses because that's the way that we're talking about them in our organization. And we just started really simply with who's the client company, information about them, who this is assigned to, a little description about the project. And then as we've grown, we realized we really need to track skill set, because that means the different resource at Sympraxis will be assigned to that project. And as we got so many requests, we need to start tracking proposed start date to make sure that we don't have too many starting at the same time to work on that resource availability. So we've been able to really easily just add these columns in under 5 minutes during a meeting when we realize we have that need, and to really keep this growing with us. Now, one of the things that we added to it was we realized that the list wasn't necessarily enough. It was great when we were talking in our Friday meetings, but sometimes we would bring up a client and it would remind us on that Friday, oh, I forgot to send them an email. So we added in a little automation. So we have a last contact date. And if you haven't contacted that person for X amount of days since the last contact date, you get this funny little email. And Sympraxis, as you probably know from joining all these calls, we have a quirky little personality. So we have a sense of humor in our reminder emails that reflect our culture as well.
We call them the poop emails. Just to be clear, I got a poop email today.
And we built this using Flow. And it was, I think Emily and I did it in the course of, an hour or something like that, one day. And it was just the kind of thing where we wanted to make sure that we were meeting that need, because we would hit something on a Friday and then accidentally we would forget about it until the next Friday and we'd go, oh, I should have called them back. And so this runs every night. And if you haven't talked to that person in 2 weeks, this pings you. And it's irritating, and some folks just delete it, but at the end of the day, it is a reminder to help facilitate that business process.
And not just a reminder.
I find it, I get a little chuckle from it. I say, oh yeah. I'm gonna deal with that tomorrow, and so sometimes I delete it, and sometimes I deal with it tomorrow, and that's totally cool. But it's absolutely tolerable, and we all agreed this is important enough that we should get these emails every day.
So List to store the data, Flow to kind of push these reminders to us, because the list is wonderful, but we don't all go there every day. And then some other capabilities that we talked about, the analytics based on the list.
One important point with the email, though, Mike, is that we also had embedded there a link to update the item. So it's not just a reminder. We're removing the friction from someone to then complete the action and then put an update in the list so they don't get more.
Yep. And to take that farther, one of us wrote a PowerShell commandlet where you can right-click on that link and update this item in the SharePoint list with a PowerShell commandlet. So, a little something for everybody.
I just find it vastly amusing that PowerShell is easier for you than just going to
SharePoint
the list
UI.
item and editing it. But okay.
I will spend hours and hours writing PowerShell to save myself seconds of UI work. Absolutely.
Clearly.
We're going to start tracking in a chart similar to this one, the first mention of PowerShell by Todd on these calls. Today was 12:46.
I was late.
Yeah, a little slow. You're a little slow. So another of the capabilities we talked about is the ability to easily look at the list with Power BI and quickly get some pretty meaningful reports. So Emily, do you want to talk about this one a little bit? We use this. I love this one. Every Friday we're into this.
Sure. So after we have our inbound, we have another list that's our resource availability. So each of us put in our own line items of who we're working for and what percentage of our time that's going to be. And that then all gets accumulated to show the percent utilization. And we have those tabs across the top so you can drill down into one specific person and kind of see where they are with their workload. Now, we also add vacation and conferences into this because that's time when we can't be working with clients. And then we have another view of our dashboard as well that just shows us for the next 6 months out who each person is working on, and then a different view of that percent utilization on these wheels as well.
So simple. I mean, matter of hours, right? Putting this together.
I would say the dashboard maybe like 3 to 4 because I'm not a strong Power BI user. So it's something that I was learning while I was doing it.
Yeah.
But again, as complicated as it needed to be, though I think you did some sort of bells and whistles on this as well. But not like, let's build this ginormous dashboard that tells us what the frequency of messages coming in is, or something that just isn't relevant.
And this also grew organically, right? We started with the project list, the incoming list. We added the flow with the poop emails, and then we said, oh wait, we also need to know when these new projects come in. We need to know when Emily frees up. And so then we developed this resource availability dashboard. And so we're sort of, graduating the solution as we've grown as an organization and as our needs have grown.
So to kind of put a pin in this and then translate this, we have 3 minutes left, to ways that this is translated for our clients. We've built a lot of solutions, and we have a couple of kind of lookbook type slides to talk about the way these have been done to help clients manage portfolios of projects or legal clients and matters or real estate properties or transactions. So some of the capabilities here, the list formatting, you'll see some of the column formatting in the lists to this. I don't know how much depth we want to go into on this in the interest of time.
I think the theme here was, we often see something similar like this with our client. People have units of work. This is a property management company, so their unit of work is a property. The next slide is a law firm, so their unit of work is a matter. So we often are building lists that are sort of analogous to what we do with our inbound client requests. And those lists then drive a whole bunch of stuff. In this example, I built a SharePoint framework extension across the top there that helps them navigate amongst I can't remember how many it is now, Todd. It's like 3,000 some matters, and all they know is the number. They don't really want to think about the fact that the URL is a particular thing. So you can take that data and repurpose it in lots of other ways, in other words.
Yeah, and the thing that I want to mention, so like Mark said, it's based on whatever your unit of work is, but it's also a unit of work that has a start, a beginning, and an end. So we all have things that we do that are always ever present, but for us, a client engagement, or in this case, a legal thing. This one I really love. It probably wouldn't work, but we did some really great stuff for this client based on this idea of building a legal management system out of SharePoint. And I'm guessing there are legal, technical consultants who would just be horrified that we did this, but we have showed it. We have showed it to other legal customers, and they have just been drooling because it's exactly the thing that they want. So it's
redacted, of course.
Of course.
All right, so some leave behinds, right? Some themes and some resources to walk away with. Not going to read a slide to you, but I'd love to hear if there's anything that we want to underscore here for folks. I don't think we put anything in about Chris Kent's excellent work.
It's at the very bottom.
Yep, it's the last list.
The list formatting.
It's the last
PNP.
one, Mike. Come on.
Got it.
Yep, there are lots of great samples on pnp.github.io for lots of different things, but list formatting specifically is a good one if you're doing stuff like that.
I could even encourage people to copy and paste without knowing what they're doing on that one. Just that's what you want, copy it. Not something I would normally encourage. But
Wow,
that
never
one,
words never heard from Julie before.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Never.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting soft in my old age.
So 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about accessibility. How do we make our solutions available to everybody? I think we'd be very interested in hearing from some of you if you are supporting users who have accessibility needs, whether it's screen readers, colorblindness, whatever the case may be. Definitely want to hear your input on that. We'll bring some best practices and some examples to the table as well.
Yeah, definitely hope it's an interactive one because I'm sure a lot of people have unique experiences there.
For sure.
Oh, Steve, that's nice.
Oh, Steve.
That is really nice.
Thank you.
Steve's my new favorite
That
person.
gets a big heart.
Got me right in the feels.
Feels. Oh, we're sorry for him.
We have no feels.
Put Ruth and Steve on that gift list that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
All right. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
folks. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks for joining us today.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.